I never thought I would return to Ashford Manor. The iron gates felt like the mouth of a past I had buried, and yet here I stood, a leather case in one hand and my son's small fingers clutched tightly in the other. The position had been offered through a letter, unsigned but unmistakably his in tone. A governess was needed, a woman of discretion, someone who understood the delicate nature of a household that prized silence above all else. I had read it 3 times before the ink blurred beneath my tears, and I knew even then that I should refuse. But winter was closing in, and Thomas needed food, warmth, a roof that did not leak when the rains came. So I wrote back with a single word: yes. Now the manor rose before me like a monument to everything I had once hoped for and lost. Its stone facade was gray and unyielding, the windows dark except for a single light in the upper hall. I could feel Thomas pulling at my skirt, his green eyes wide with wonder at the size of the house, at the horses in the stable yard, at the world that had always been denied to him. He did not know this place. He did not know that his very existence was a secret woven into every stone. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, met us at the servants' entrance. She was older now, her face lined with years of managing a household that preferred order to warmth, but her eyes held a flicker of recognition when they landed on me. She said nothing. She simply nodded and gestured for us to follow her down a narrow corridor that smelled of beeswax and old wood. "Your quarters are in the east wing," she said, her voice clipped and efficient. "The boy will stay with you until we determine his temperament. His Grace has requested that the new governess begin immediately with Miss Arabella. She is 12 and has proven difficult for the last 3 tutors." I listened, but my heart was elsewhere. Somewhere in this house, he was breathing the same air I breathed, the Duke of Ashford, the man who had spoken my name in the dark as though it were a prayer, and then, when the sun rose, looked through me as though I were glass. Thomas tugged my hand again, and I bent down to whisper that he must be very quiet, very good. He nodded solemnly, his face so earnest it made my chest ache. He did not understand why we had come here, why his mother's hands trembled as she smoothed his hair. He only knew that we were together, and for him, that was enough. Mrs. Calloway left us at the door to a small sitting room adjoining a narrow bedroom. The furnishings were simple but clean. A bed, a desk, a window that overlooked the garden where, 5 years ago, I had walked in the moonlight and believed for one foolish night that love could transcend the boundaries of birth and station. I unpacked our few belongings while Thomas explored the room with the curiosity of a child who had never known anything but cramped quarters and borrowed spaces. He found a wooden horse on the mantelpiece, left behind by some previous occupant, and held it up to me with a grin that broke my heart. He looked so much like his father in that moment. The same sharp cheekbones, the same unruly dark hair, the same green eyes that seemed to see more than they should. I was arranging my books on the desk when the door opened without warning. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. And there he was. The Duke of Ashford stood in the doorway, taller than I remembered, his shoulders broader beneath the dark wool of his coat. His face was as cold and unreadable as marble, his jaw set in that familiar line of control. But his eyes, those green eyes that Thomas had inherited, flickered with something I could not name when they found mine. "Miss Harlow," he said, and my name in his mouth was a knife. "I was told you had arrived." I curtsied, my hands shaking so badly I had to clasp them together. "Your Grace." He stepped into the room, and I felt the air grow thin. He did not look at Thomas, not yet, but I knew the moment was coming. I could feel it like a storm gathering on the horizon. "I trust Mrs. Calloway has explained your duties." "She has, Your Grace. My daughter requires structure and discipline. She has been indulged by women who mistook kindness for competence. I expect you to be firm. I will do my best." His gaze moved past me then, and I felt my heart stop. Thomas had put down the wooden horse and was staring up at the Duke with the unguarded curiosity of a child who did not yet understand fear. The silence stretched, taut and terrible, and I saw the Duke's eyes narrow, his brow furrow ever so slightly. "This is your son," he said, and it was not a question. "Yes, Your Grace. His name is Thomas." The Duke took a step closer, and I resisted the urge to move between them, to shield my boy from the truth that was written in every line of his face. He crouched down, slowly, until he was eye level with Thomas, and I watched as my son smiled at him, open and trusting. "How old are you, Thomas?" "4, sir. Nearly 5. The Duke's jaw tightened. He reached out, almost without thinking, and touched the boy's hair, his fingers hesitant, as though he were handling something fragile and dangerous all at once. Then he stood abruptly and turned back to me, and the coldness had returned. But beneath it, I saw something raw and unsteady. "He will not wander the house unsupervised," he said. "Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click that echoed louder than a slam. I sank into the chair by the desk, my hands pressed to my face, and felt the weight of 5 years collapse upon me all at once. Thomas climbed into my lap, his small arms winding around my neck. "Mama, why did that man look sad?" I held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, and whispered the only truth I could give him. "I do not know, my darling. I do not know, but I did know. I knew because I had seen that same look in my own reflection every day since the morning I realized I was carrying his child and that he would never claim us. I knew because love, when it is denied, does not disappear. It only buries itself deeper, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be contained." That night, after Thomas had fallen asleep, I stood at the window and looked out over the dark expanse of the estate. Somewhere in this house, the Duke was awake, staring into the same darkness, and I wondered if he, too, was remembering the night we had pretended we were not servant and master, but simply two people who had found, for a brief and burning moment, something that felt like belonging. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and closed my eyes. I had returned to Ashford Manor knowing the risk, knowing that every day would be a kind of torment. But I had also returned because, deep in the foolish chambers of my heart, I still hoped. I hoped that he would look at Thomas and see not a reminder of his lapse in judgment, but a child who deserved a father. I hoped that he would look at me and remember that I had loved him, truly and without condition, even when he could not love me in return. The wind rattled the window, and I opened my eyes to the darkness. Hope, I knew, was a dangerous thing for a woman like me. But it was also the only thing I had left, and so I would stay. I would teach his daughter, keep his secrets, and raise his son in the shadows of the house that should have been ours. I would endure the weight of his gaze and the silence of his acknowledgement. I would do all of this because, in the end, I had no choice. But I would not beg. I would not break, and I would not tell him the truth unless he had the courage to ask. The morning came too soon, pale and cold, slipping through the thin curtains like a reluctant guest. I woke to the sound of Thomas's breathing beside me, steady and soft, and for a moment I allowed myself the luxury of simply watching him sleep. His lashes were dark against his cheek, his mouth slightly open. One hand curled beneath his chin. He looked so peaceful, so unburdened by the complications of the world we lived in. I rose quietly and dressed in the plain gray gown that marked my station, pinning my hair back severely, erasing any trace of the girl I had once been. The girl who had laughed in the garden and let herself believe for one night that she was more than a servant in borrowed time. Mrs. Calloway knocked precisely at 7, her face as stern as the house itself. "Miss Arabella is waiting in the schoolroom. She has already dismissed her breakfast tray. You will find her temperament challenging." I nodded and followed her through the corridors, leaving Thomas in the care of a young maid named Bess, who promised to watch him while I attended to my duties. He clung to my skirt for a moment before I left, and I kissed the top of his head, whispering that I would return soon. The schoolroom was on the 3rd floor, a bright space with tall windows that overlooked the grounds. It should have been cheerful, but the girl sitting at the desk with her arms crossed and her chin raised in defiance made it feel like a battlefield. Miss Arabella was small for 12, with dark curls that had been elaborately arranged and a dress far too fine for a morning of lessons. She looked at me with the cool assessment of someone who had learned early that people could be dismissed with a glance. "You are the new governess," she said, not bothering to stand. "I am. My name is Miss Harlow." The last one cried, "Do you cry easily, Miss Harlow?" I met her gaze steadily. "No." She seemed disappointed. "My father says you have a son. Why would he allow a woman with a child to teach me?" The question was meant to wound, and it did, but I kept my voice calm. "Because I am capable, and because your father believes you deserve an education." She laughed, a brittle sound. "My father believes I deserve discipline. He thinks I am wild." "Are you?" She blinked, surprised by the directness. Then she smiled, a small, genuine thing that softened her whole face. "Sometimes." We spent the morning working through mathematics and literature, and I found that beneath the bravado, Arabella was sharp and curious, starved for attention that was not laced with judgment. She tested me, of course, with questions designed to provoke or confuse, but I answered each one with patience, and slowly she began to relax. It was midday when the door to the schoolroom opened, and the Duke stepped inside. Arabella's spine went rigid, her hands folding neatly in her lap, and I rose from my chair, curtsying as protocol demanded. "Your Grace." He did not acknowledge me. His attention was entirely on his daughter. "How are your studies progressing?" "Arabella?" "Well, Father, Miss Harlow is maintaining discipline." Arabella glanced at me, and I saw a flicker of something like conspiracy in her eyes. "Yes, Father, she is very strict." The Duke's gaze shifted to me then, and I felt the full weight of it. There was no warmth in his expression, no hint of the man who had once held me as though I were something precious. He was the Duke, and I was the governess, and the distance between us was insurmountable. "See that you continue," he said, and turned to leave. But then Thomas appeared in the doorway, his small face flushed from running, Bess trailing behind him with an apologetic look. "I told him to stay, miss, but he wanted his mama." Thomas ran to me, wrapping his arms around my legs, and I placed a hand on his head, my heart pounding. I looked up and found the Duke standing frozen, his eyes locked on the boy. Arabella stood as well, her curiosity piqued. "Who is this?" "This is my son, Thomas," I said quietly. She crouched down, smiling at him. "Hello, Thomas. I am Arabella. Do you like horses?" Thomas nodded shyly, and Arabella glanced up at her father. "May I take him to see the stables, Father?" The Duke's face was unreadable, but his voice, when it came, was strained. "Another time, Arabella." He looked at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the fracture in his composure. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the hall, and I was left standing there with my son in my arms and the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on me like stone. Arabella watched him go, then looked at me with a knowing expression, far too old for her years. My father does not like to be surprised. "No," I said softly. "He does not." But as I held Thomas close and felt the tremble in my own hands, I knew that this was only the beginning. The Duke had seen his son, truly seen him, and nothing would ever be the same. The days that followed were a study in restraint. I moved through the manor like a ghost, present but unseen, speaking only when spoken to, keeping Thomas close and quiet. He was a good child, patient beyond his years, content to play with the few toys I had brought and to sit beside me in the evenings while I read aloud from books that had once belonged to someone else. Arabella, for all her earlier defiance, had softened toward me. She asked questions about Thomas, about where we had lived before, about whether I had always been a governess. I answered carefully, offering just enough truth to satisfy her curiosity without revealing the depth of the secret I carried. She seemed lonely, I realized, trapped in a house that valued silence over warmth, and I found myself growing fond of her sharp wit and the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. But it was the Duke who haunted me. I saw him rarely, only in passing, and yet I felt his presence everywhere. In the way Mrs. Calloway watched me with narrowed eyes, in the way the other servants whispered when I walked by, in the heavy silence that filled the corridors whenever his footsteps approached. He did not speak to me again after that first day. He did not acknowledge Thomas. But I caught him watching us once from the window of his study, his face half hidden in shadow, and the look in his eyes was so raw, so conflicted, that I had to turn away before the tears came. It was a Thursday afternoon, nearly 2 weeks after our arrival, when everything began to unravel. I was in the schoolroom with Arabella, reviewing her French grammar, when the door opened and a woman I did not recognize swept into the room. She was beautiful in the way that society demanded, her gown a confection of silk and lace, her hair arranged in perfect ringlets. She smelled of rose water and entitlement. Arabella stood immediately, her face going pale. Aunt Vivian. The woman smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Darling girl, I have come to see how you are faring with your new governess." She turned to me, and her gaze was sharp, assessing. "You must be Miss Harlowe." I curtsied. "I am." Lady Vivian Ashford was the Duke's widowed sister, I learned later. A woman who had returned to the manor after her husband's death and had made it her business to oversee the household in ways that made Mrs. Calloway bristle. She circled me slowly as though I were a horse at auction, and I felt my skin prickle with discomfort. "You have a child," she said. "A boy." "Yes, my lady, and no husband. I am a widow, my lady." It was a lie, one I had told so many times it almost felt true. But Lady Vivian's smile suggested she did not believe me. How convenient. "And where is this child now?" "With one of the maids, my lady. I should like to meet him. Arabella, fetch the boy." Arabella hesitated, glancing at me, and I saw the worry in her eyes. But there was nothing to be done. She left the room, and I stood alone with Lady Vivian, who moved to the window and looked out over the garden with an expression of bored curiosity. "My brother has always been too generous," she said softly. "Too willing to see the best in people. It is a weakness, I think." I said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. When Arabella returned with Thomas, I felt my heart seize. He looked so small beside her, his hand clutching hers, his eyes wide with uncertainty. Lady Vivian turned, and I watched as her gaze moved over his face, taking in every detail: the dark hair, the green eyes, the shape of his nose and the set of his jaw. She went very still. "How old is he?" "4, my lady, nearly 5. "And his father?" "Dead, my lady. As I said, I am a widow." Lady Vivian crouched down, much as the Duke had done, and studied Thomas with an intensity that made my blood run cold. She reached out and tilted his chin up, forcing him to look at her, and I saw the exact moment she understood. She rose slowly, her face a mask of cold fury. "You will come with me, Miss Harlowe." "Arabella, take the boy back to his room." Arabella looked stricken, but she obeyed, leading Thomas away while I followed Lady Vivian down the corridor and into a small parlor that smelled of lavender and old perfume. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her hands trembling with rage. "Do you take me for a fool?" "I do not know what you mean, my lady. That child is my brother's. Anyone with eyes can see it." I felt the floor shift beneath me, but I kept my voice steady. "You are mistaken." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Am I? Tell me, Miss Harlowe, how long have you been plotting this?" Did you think you could worm your way back into this house and use that boy to trap my brother into acknowledging his mistake? He is not a mistake." The words were out before I could stop them, and I saw Lady Vivian's eyes flash with triumph. "So you admit it." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. She paced the room, her skirt swishing with each sharp turn. "My brother is a duke. He has responsibilities, a name to protect, a legacy to uphold. He cannot be associated with some common servant and her bastard child." The word struck me like a blow, and I flinched. Lady Vivian saw it and smiled. "You will leave this house immediately. I will arrange for a carriage and enough money to see you settled elsewhere. But you will never contact my brother again, and you will never speak of this to anyone. Do you understand?" I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze. "And if I refuse, then I will make certain that you and your son have nowhere to go. I have friends in every corner of this country. Miss Harlowe, I will see to it that no respectable household will employ you, that no landlord will rent to you, that you are cast out into the streets with nothing. Is that what you want for your child?" My hands were shaking, my throat tight with fury and fear. But before I could answer, the door opened and the Duke stood there, his face like stone. "Vivian, what is the meaning of this?" Lady Vivian turned to him, her expression shifting to one of wounded concern. "Brother, I was only trying to protect you. This woman has been deceiving us. Her son is yours, is he not?" The silence that followed was suffocating. The Duke's eyes moved to me, and I saw the question there, the demand for truth. I wanted to lie, to protect him from the consequences, but I was so tired of lying. "Yes," I said quietly. "He is yours." The Duke's face did not change, but something in his posture crumpled, just slightly, as though he had been holding his breath for weeks and had finally let it out. He looked at his sister, and when he spoke, his voice was cold and precise. "Leave us." "But brother—" "Now, Vivian." She hesitated, then swept from the room, closing the door behind her with more force than necessary. The Duke and I stood alone, the weight of 5 years pressing down on us, and I waited for him to speak, to rage, to cast me out as his sister had demanded. Instead, he crossed the room and sank into a chair by the fire, his head in his hands. "Why did you not tell me?" I swallowed hard. Would it have mattered? He looked up at me, and I saw the anguish in his eyes. Of course it would have mattered. "You sent me away. The morning after, you looked at me as though I were nothing. You told Mrs. Calloway to give me my wages and see that I left by noon." What was I supposed to think? "I was afraid," he said, his voice breaking. "I was a coward, and I've regretted it every day since." The confession shattered something inside me, and I felt the tears come, hot and unbidden. I tried to tell myself, you did not deserve to know, that Thomas was mine alone. But he asks about his father, and I do not know what to say. I do not know how to tell him that the man he will grow to resemble wanted nothing to do with him. The Duke stood abruptly and crossed to me, his hands gripping my shoulders. "That is not true. I did not know." "If I had known—" He stopped, his jaw working, and I saw the tears in his own eyes. "If I had known, I would have claimed you both. I would have faced the scandal, the judgment, all of it. I loved you, Eleanor. I have never stopped loving you." My name in his mouth, spoken with such tenderness, undid me completely. I collapsed against him, and he held me, his arms strong and steady, his face buried in my hair. We stood like that for a long time, two people who had been torn apart by fear and duty, finally allowing themselves to feel the grief of what had been lost. But love, I knew, was not enough. Not in a world that would see my son as a stain on his father's name. Not in a house where secrets were currency and silence was survival. I pulled away, wiping my eyes, and looked up at him. "What happens now?" He took a breath, steadying himself. Now I do what I should have done 5 years ago. I claim my son. I claim you. And your sister? The scandal? Let them come. But even as he said it, I saw the doubt flicker across his face, and I knew that the battle was far from over. The world we lived in did not forgive, and it did not forget. And somewhere in this house, Lady Vivian was already planning her next move. The Duke kept his word, though the cost of it became clear almost immediately. That evening, he summoned the household staff to the drawing room, a space reserved for formal occasions and announcements that could not be ignored. I stood at the back with Thomas beside me, my hand resting protectively on his shoulder, while the servants assembled in nervous rows. Mrs. Calloway's face was tight with disapproval, and I could feel the weight of their stares, the whispers that would follow. Lady Vivian stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of barely controlled fury. Arabella had been sent to her room, though I suspected she was listening at the door, her curiosity too strong to be contained by a simple command. The Duke entered last, his posture rigid, his face carved from stone. He did not look at me, but I felt his awareness of my presence like a physical thing, a tether that connected us across the crowded room. "I have gathered you here to make an announcement," he began, his voice carrying the authority of generations. "It has come to my attention that I have a son. His name is Thomas Harlow, and he is 4 years old. His mother, Miss Eleanor Harlow, has served this household faithfully, and I will not tolerate any disrespect shown to her or to the boy." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw shock ripple through the room, saw Mrs. Calloway's mouth fall open, saw the younger maids exchange wide-eyed glances. But it was Lady Vivian's reaction that chilled me. Her face remained composed, but her eyes burned with a rage so intense I felt it like heat across my skin. "Brother," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "surely you do not mean to acknowledge the child publicly. I mean to do exactly that. You will ruin us. The scandal alone. I am the Duke of Ashford. I decide what ruins us and what does not." Lady Vivian took a step forward, her hands clenched at her sides. "And what of Arabella? What of her prospects, her future? No respectable family will align themselves with us once this becomes known. Then they are not worthy of our consideration." The Duke's tone left no room for argument, but Lady Vivian was not finished. She turned her gaze to me, and I saw the venom there, the promise of retribution. "This woman has bewitched you. She came here with the sole intention of trapping you into acknowledging her bastard. Enough." The word cracked through the room like a whip, and even Lady Vivian flinched. The Duke crossed to where I stood, and in front of the entire household, he placed a hand on Thomas's head, a gesture so tender and deliberate it brought tears to my eyes. "This is my son. He will be raised here, under my roof, with every advantage and protection I can provide. Anyone who takes issue with that may leave my employ immediately." No one moved, no one spoke. The Duke's gaze swept the room, daring anyone to challenge him, and when the silence held, he dismissed them with a curt nod. The servants filed out, their whispers already beginning, and I knew that by morning the entire county would know. Lady Vivian remained, her face pale with fury. "You are a fool, Charles. You have thrown away everything our family built for the sake of a servant and her child. I have corrected a mistake I should never have made. If that costs me my standing, so be it." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned on her heel and left, her skirts snapping behind her like a flag of war. The Duke watched her go, his jaw tight, and I saw the exhaustion settle over him like a cloak. I stepped forward, Thomas still clinging to my hand. "Your Grace, Eleanor." He turned to me, and the formality fell away. "Please, call me Charles." The intimacy of it, the use of his Christian name, felt both foreign and achingly familiar. I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. He crouched down in front of Thomas, who looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Thomas, do you know who I am?" Thomas shook his head. "I am your father." The words hung in the air, and I watched as my son's eyes widened, his small mind trying to make sense of what he was hearing. He looked up at me, seeking confirmation, and I nodded, tears streaming down my face. "It is true, darling. This is your father." Thomas turned back to the Duke, studying him with the seriousness of a child making a monumental decision. Then slowly he reached out and took the Duke's hand. His small fingers disappeared into the larger ones, and I saw Charles close his eyes, his shoulders shaking with silent emotion. "Hello, Father," Thomas said softly, and it was the most beautiful and heartbreaking thing I had ever heard. Charles pulled him into an embrace, holding him as though he were the most precious thing in the world, and I turned away, pressing my hand to my mouth to stifle the sob that threatened to escape. This was what I had wanted, what I had dreamed of, and yet the reality of it was almost too much to bear. When Charles finally released Thomas, he stood and looked at me, his eyes red, but his expression resolute. "I will not let you go again, Eleanor. I will not let fear or duty or the judgment of others keep us apart." But even as he said it, I knew the battle had only just begun. The following days were a blur of whispered scandals and cold stares. The servants treated me with a deference that felt more like suspicion, their eyes following me wherever I went. Letters began to arrive, most of them addressed to the Duke, and I saw him grow more withdrawn with each one he read. Invitations were rescinded. Business associates sent curt refusals. The weight of society's disapproval pressed down on the household like a gathering storm. Arabella, however, surprised me. She sought me out in the schoolroom one morning, her face unusually serious. "Miss Harlowe, may I speak with you?" "Of course." She sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. I heard what Father said. "About Thomas. About you." I braced myself for judgment, for the same cold rejection I had seen in so many other faces. But Arabella only looked at me with a maturity that belied her years. "I think it is brave. What Father did." I blinked, startled. "You do?" She nodded. "Everyone in this house is so concerned with what others think. But Father chose you. He chose Thomas. That takes courage." I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a small light in the darkness. "Thank you, Arabella. That means more than you know." She smiled, then hesitated. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you love him?" "My father?" The question caught me off guard, and I struggled to find the right words. "I did. I do. But love is complicated, especially when the world tells you it is wrong." Arabella considered this, then stood. "I do not think it is wrong. I think people are afraid of anything that does not fit into their perfect little boxes. But I am glad you are here, and I am glad Thomas is here. He makes Father smile, and I cannot remember the last time I saw that." She left before I could respond, and I sat alone in the schoolroom, her words echoing in my mind. It was true. Charles did smile when he was with Thomas, a softness entering his features that I had only glimpsed once before in the garden all those years ago. But the world outside the manor was less forgiving. Lady Vivian had taken up residence in the Dowager House, a smaller estate on the edge of the property, but her influence remained. She entertained a steady stream of visitors, all of them eager to hear the latest gossip, and I knew she was spreading her version of events, painting me as a schemer and Charles as a fool. One evening, as I was putting Thomas to bed, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Charles standing there, his face drawn with fatigue. "May I come in?" I stepped aside and he entered, his eyes immediately finding Thomas, who was already half asleep. He crossed to the bed and knelt beside it, brushing the boy's hair back with a tenderness that made my heart ache. "He looks like you," Charles said softly. "But he has my eyes. He has your stubbornness as well." Charles smiled, A small, sad thing. I have been thinking about what we should do next. I sat down in the chair by the window, suddenly exhausted. And what have you decided? He turned to face me, his expression serious. I want to marry you, Eleanor. The words struck me like a blow, and I felt the air leave my lungs. You cannot be serious. I have never been more serious. Charles, the scandal alone would destroy you. Your family, your position. I do not care, but I do. I care about Thomas, about the life he will have. If you marry me, he will always be seen as the son of a servant, a stain on your name. He will never be fully accepted. Charles crossed to me, taking my hands in his. Then we will make our own acceptance. We will build a life where his worth is not determined by the circumstances of his birth, but by the man he becomes. And I will be there, every step of the way, to ensure he knows he is loved. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that love could conquer the weight of society's judgment, that we could carve out a space where we belonged. But the fear lingered, a shadow that refused to be banished. What if it is not enough? I whispered. What if we are not enough? He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall. Then we will fail together. But I will not fail you again, Eleanor. I will not let you face this alone. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet of the room and the steady breathing of our son, I allowed myself to believe, to hope, to imagine a future where the three of us could be a family, flawed and fragile, but ours. But outside, in the darkened corridors and hushed drawing rooms, Lady Vivian was already setting her plan in motion, and the storm that had been gathering was about to break. The storm broke on a gray Wednesday morning, 3 weeks after Charles had made his announcement. I woke to the sound of raised voices in the hall below, angry and accusatory, and my first thought was of Thomas. I found him still asleep, his face peaceful, and I pressed a kiss to his forehead before slipping from the room. The commotion was coming from the main hall where a small crowd had gathered. I recognized Lord Pemberton, a neighboring landowner and longtime friend of the family, along with 2 other gentlemen whose faces I had seen at various social functions. They stood in a tight circle around Charles, their expressions hard with judgment. You have made yourself a laughingstock, Ashford, Lord Pemberton was saying, his voice loud enough to carry through the house. The entire county is talking about you, about your servant and her bastard. I flinched at the word, but Charles remained unmoved, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with control. I am aware of what people are saying. I do not require your approval. You require the approval of your peers if you wish to maintain your standing. Already the invitations have stopped coming. Your sister tells me that Lady Hartwell has refused to consider Arabella for her son's hand. Charles's jaw tightened. Then Lady Hartwell has revealed herself to be shallow and unworthy of my daughter. And what of your son? Lord Pemberton leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Do you truly believe society will accept him? He will be marked for life, Ashford. A duke's illegitimate son, raised in the household like some kind of experiment. It is cruelty, not kindness. He is my son. He will be raised with every advantage I can provide, but he will never be legitimate. He will never inherit. The words hung in the air, heavy and immovable, and I saw the truth of them settle over Charles like a shroud. No matter how much he loved Thomas, no matter how fiercely he claimed him, our son would always be bound by the circumstances of his birth. The title, the estate, the legacy that defined the Ashford name would pass to someone else, and Thomas would remain on the periphery, forever looking in. I stepped forward, unable to remain hidden any longer. The men turned, their faces registering surprise and then distaste when they saw me. Lord Pemberton's lip curled in disdain. The woman herself. Tell me, Miss Harlowe, was this always your plan? To seduce a duke and secure a comfortable life for yourself and your child? I met his gaze without flinching. I never asked for his acknowledgement. I never asked to return to this house. The Duke made his choice, and I will not apologize for the existence of my son." "Your son." Lord Pemberton laughed, a cruel sound. "You mean the Duke's mistake." Charles moved so quickly I barely saw him. One moment he was standing still. The next he had Lord Pemberton by the collar, his face inches from the other man's, his voice low and dangerous. "You will leave my house, now. And if I ever hear you speak of my son or Miss Harlowe in such a manner again, I will ensure you regret it." Lord Pemberton sputtered, his face red with indignation, but he did not argue. The other men followed him out, casting dark looks over their shoulders, and the door slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed through the hall. Charles stood there, his breathing harsh, his hands still clenched into fists. I crossed to him, placing a hand on his arm, and he turned to me, his eyes haunted. "They are right, Eleanor. I can give Thomas my name, my protection, but I cannot give him legitimacy. I cannot undo what we did. I do not regret what we did. I only regret that the world cannot see him for who he is." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly, and I felt the tremor that ran through him, the weight of everything he was trying to bear. We stood like that for a long moment, clinging to each other in the ruins of what should have been a triumph. It was Arabella who found us. She descended the stairs slowly, her face pale, and I realized she had heard everything. She looked at her father, then at me, and I saw the conflict in her eyes. "Father," she said quietly, "people are saying terrible things about Miss Harlowe, about Thomas. Let them say what they will. But what if they are right? What if this ruins us?" Charles released me and crossed to his daughter, kneeling so he could look her in the eye. "Arabella, I have spent my entire life doing what others expected of me. I married your mother because it was advantageous. I maintained this estate because it was my duty. I have lived in a cage of propriety and expectation, and I have been miserable. But when I look at Thomas, when I look at Eleanor, I see something I thought I had lost. I see hope. I see love. And I will not turn my back on that, no matter the cost." Arabella's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around his neck. "I am not afraid, Father. I do not care what they say." But I knew she did care. I saw it in the way her hands trembled, in the way she glanced toward the door as though expecting the world to come crashing through at any moment. She was brave, but she was also 12, and the weight of her father's choice was settling on her young shoulders. The days that followed were a descent into isolation. The servants grew bolder in their whispers, and I caught fragments of conversations that painted me as a scheming woman who had trapped the Duke with my wiles. Mrs. Calloway's disapproval became outright hostility, and I found myself relegated to the shadows of the house, moving through it like a ghost. Lady Vivian did not return to the manor, but her presence was felt in every letter that arrived, every visitor who came to express their concern. She was orchestrating a campaign against us, leveraging every connection she had to turn society against Charles, and I could see the toll it was taking on him. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, spending long hours in his study with the door closed. I wanted to reach him, to remind him that we were still here, that we had not given up, but I was afraid that he was beginning to regret his decision, afraid that the love he had proclaimed so fiercely was not strong enough to withstand the relentless assault of judgment and scorn. It was Thomas who broke through the walls Charles had built around himself. One evening, I found them in the library, Thomas perched on his father's knee, asking questions about the books that lined the shelves. Charles was reading to him, his deep voice steady and calm, and when he looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, he smiled. It was a small thing, that smile, but it felt like a lifeline. I crossed to them, sitting down in the chair beside Charles, and for a moment, the three of us existed in a bubble of peace, insulated from the chaos that raged beyond the walls of the manor. Thomas fell asleep in his father's arms, and Charles carried him upstairs, tucking him into bed with a tenderness that made my heart ache. When he returned, he took my hand and led me to his study, closing the door behind us. He poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to me before sinking into the chair by the fire. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "about what Lord Pemberton said, about Thomas's future." I sipped the brandy, letting the warmth spread through me. "What have you concluded? That I cannot give him everything I wish I could. I cannot make him legitimate. I cannot erase the stigma of his birth. But I can give him something else. I can give him education, opportunity, the tools to build a life of his own choosing. And I can give him the knowledge that he is loved, unconditionally and without reservation." I set down my glass and moved to kneel beside his chair, taking his hands in mine. "That is all any child needs, Charles. You are giving him more than most children ever receive." He looked at me, and I saw the doubt in his eyes, the fear that he was failing us. But I also saw the determination, the fierce love that would not be extinguished no matter how hard the world tried. "I want to marry you," he said again. "Not because of obligation or duty, but because I love you. Because I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep knowing you are there. Because I want the world to see that you are mine, and I am yours." The tears came then, hot and unrestrained, and I pressed my forehead to his hands. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, Charles, I will marry you." He pulled me up into his lap, holding me close, and we sat there in the firelight, 2 people who had been broken and rebuilt, who had loved and lost and found each other again. The world outside might not forgive us, but we would build our own world, one where love was enough. But even as we held each other, I knew that Lady Vivian had not finished. She had one final card to play, and when she played it, everything we had fought for would hang in the balance. The letter arrived the next morning. It was addressed to Charles, written in Lady Vivian's elegant hand, and when he opened it, his face went pale. He read it twice, his hands shaking, and then he looked at me with an expression of such anguish that I felt my stomach drop. "What is it?" He handed me the letter, and I read the words that would change everything. "My dearest brother, I write to you not out of malice, but out of love for our family and concern for your well-being. I have consulted with our solicitors, and they inform me that if you marry Miss Harlowe, the scandal will be sufficient grounds for the family to petition for the removal of your guardianship over Arabella. The courts will not look kindly upon a man who defies all propriety and decency, and they will not hesitate to place your daughter in the care of those who will raise her with the values befitting her station. I urge you to reconsider your course of action before it is too late. Your loving sister, Vivienne." I lowered the letter, my hands numb. She would take Arabella from you. She would try, and she might succeed. Charles sank into a chair, his head in his hands, and I saw the impossible choice laid out before him. He could marry me, claim Thomas fully, and risk losing Arabella. Or he could protect his daughter and condemn us to a life of shadows and secrets. I knelt beside him, placing my hands on his knees. "Charles, listen to me. You do not have to choose. We can wait. We can be patient." He looked up at me, his eyes red. "I am tired of being patient. Eleanor, I am tired of hiding. Then we will find another way. But I will not let you lose Arabella. She needs you." He pulled me into his arms, and I felt the tears on his cheek, the weight of a love that could not be contained and a duty that could not be denied. We held each other in the ruins of our hope, and I wondered if there was any path forward that would not require us to sacrifice something precious. Outside, the world waited, unforgiving and cold, and I knew that the hardest battle was yet to come. The days following Lady Vivian's letter were among the darkest I had known. Charles withdrew into himself, the weight of the impossible choice bearing down on him with a force that seemed to age him before my eyes. He spent hours with Arabella, reading to her, walking the grounds with her, as though trying to memorize every moment before it was taken from him. I kept my distance, giving him space to think, to grieve, to wrestle with the decision that had no right answer. Thomas sensed the tension. His small face creased with worry, and I held him close at night, whispering that everything would be all right, even as I doubted my own words. It was Arabella who finally forced the issue. She came to me one afternoon while I was in the schoolroom, her face set with a determination that reminded me so much of her father. "Miss Harlow, I need to speak with you." Of course. I set down the book I had been reading and gave her my full attention. She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap, and I saw that she had been crying. "Aunt Vivienne came to see me yesterday. She told me that Father wants to marry you, and that if he does, the courts will take me away from him." I felt my heart constrict. "Arabella, that is not something you should have to worry about." "But I do worry about it. I worry about Father, about you, about Thomas. I worry that everyone is so busy trying to protect me that they forget to ask what I want. And what do you want?" She looked at me with eyes that were too old for her years. "I want my father to be happy. I want him to stop looking so sad all the time. I want Thomas to have a father who claims him openly. And I want you to stop hiding in the shadows as though you have done something wrong." The tears came before I could stop them, and I reached across the table to take her hand. "Arabella, you are the bravest person I know." She squeezed my fingers, her own tears falling freely now. "Then help me be brave enough to do what needs to be done." "What do you mean?" She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to me. "I have written a letter to the magistrate. I have told him that I do not wish to leave my father's care, that Aunt Vivienne is acting out of spite and not concern, and that I am old enough to have a say in my own future. I need you to help me send it." I unfolded the letter and read the careful, precise words that laid out her case with a clarity that belied her age. She had thought of everything, anticipated every argument, and made it clear that she would not be a pawn in her aunt's schemes. "Arabella, this is extraordinary. But are you certain? Once this letter is sent, there is no taking it back. I am certain. My father has fought for Thomas. Now it is my turn to fight for him." I looked at this remarkable girl, this child who had been raised in privilege but had learned compassion, who had every reason to resent me and Thomas, but had chosen kindness instead. And I knew that whatever happened, she would be all right. She had her father's strength and a courage that was entirely her own. "I will help you," I said, "and I will stand beside you no matter what comes." That evening I brought the letter to Charles. He read it in silence, his face a study in conflicting emotions, and when he finished, he set it down and looked at me with something like wonder. "She wrote this?" "She did, and she means every word." He stood and paced to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. I have been so focused on protecting her that I forgot she might not need protecting. Not in the way I thought. "She needs you to be happy, Charles. She needs to see that love is worth fighting for, even when the cost is high." He turned to me, and I saw the resolve settle over him like armor. "Then we will fight. Together, all of us." The letter was sent the next morning, and within a week we received a response. The magistrate agreed to hear Arabella's testimony, and a date was set for the hearing. Lady Vivienne, upon learning of her niece's defiance, descended upon the manor in a fury. She stormed into the drawing room where Charles and I were reviewing documents with the solicitor, her face flushed with rage. "How dare you involve Arabella in this sordid affair? She is a child. She does not understand the consequences of what she is doing." Charles rose to his feet, his voice calm but unyielding. "She understands perfectly. She understands that family is more than bloodlines and titles. She understands that love requires sacrifice, and she is willing to make it. You have poisoned her mind. This woman has turned her against me." I stood as well, meeting Lady Vivienne's gaze. "I have done nothing but care for your niece and teach her to think for herself. If she has turned against you, it is because of your own actions, not mine." Lady Vivienne's eyes blazed. "You will regret this, Miss Harlow. When the courts see what kind of woman you are, they will never allow you near that child. Then let them see. Let them see a woman who loves her son and has done everything in her power to give him a good life. Let them see a man who has chosen honor over convenience, and let them see a girl who is brave enough to speak her own truth." The hearing took place on a cold morning in early November. The courtroom was small and austere, the walls lined with books and legal documents that represented centuries of precedent and tradition. Charles sat beside his solicitor, his face pale but composed. Arabella sat with me, her hand gripping mine tightly, and I could feel the tremor that ran through her. Lady Vivian sat on the opposite side of the room, surrounded by her own counsel and a handful of supporters who had come to watch the spectacle. Their eyes were cold and judgmental, and I felt the weight of their stares like stones. The magistrate, an older man with a lined face and kind eyes, called the hearing to order. He listened first to Lady Vivian's counsel, who painted a picture of a household in chaos, a duke who had abandoned all sense of propriety, and a child who was being exposed to influences that would corrupt her moral character. Then it was our turn. The solicitor presented Arabella's letter, along with testimony from Mrs. Calloway, who, to my surprise, spoke in defense of the household, admitting that while unconventional, the arrangements had not harmed Arabella in any measurable way. Finally, the magistrate called Arabella to the stand. She rose with a grace that seemed beyond her years, her chin lifted, her hand steady as she took the oath. The magistrate smiled at her gently. "Miss Arabella, I understand you have something you wish to say." "Yes, sir. I wish to say that my father is a good man. He has made choices that others do not understand, but he has made them out of love. Miss Harlow has been nothing but kind to me. Her son, Thomas, is my brother in all but name, and I am proud to call him family. My aunt believes she is protecting me, but she is wrong. The only thing I need protection from is being taken away from the people I love." Her voice did not waver. She spoke with a clarity and conviction that silenced the room, and when she finished, even Lady Vivian's supporters seemed uncertain. The magistrate considered for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Miss Arabella. You may step down." The hearing concluded with the magistrate's decision delivered swiftly and without ceremony. He found no grounds to remove Arabella from her father's care, citing her own testimony and the lack of evidence that she was being harmed. Lady Vivian's petition was denied, and Charles was granted full custody. Lady Vivian stood abruptly, her face white with fury, and stormed from the courtroom without a word. I watched her go, feeling no triumph, only a deep, bone-weary relief. Charles pulled Arabella into his arms, holding her tightly, and I saw the tears streaming down his face. "You were magnificent," he whispered, "so brave, so strong." She smiled through her own tears. "I learned from you, Father." We left the courtroom together, a family in every sense that mattered, and returned to Ashford Manor as the first snow began to fall. The world outside might still judge us, might still whisper and speculate, but within the walls of the manor, we had carved out a space that was ours alone. Charles and I were married in a quiet ceremony 3 weeks later. There were no grand celebrations, no crowds of well-wishers, only Arabella and Thomas standing beside us as we spoke our vows in the small chapel on the estate. The vicar, an old friend of Charles's, performed the ceremony with a warmth that felt like a benediction, and when Charles kissed me, I felt the weight of 5 years lift from my shoulders. Arabella took Thomas's hand as we walked back to the manor, the two of them chattering about the wedding breakfast that awaited us. I watched them. These 2 children who had been brought together by circumstance and had found in each other something like kinship, and I felt a hope I had not dared to feel before. That night, after the children were asleep, Charles and I stood at the window of our room, looking out over the snow-covered grounds. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, and I leaned back into his warmth. "Do you think we will be happy?" I asked softly. "I think we already are." I turned in his arms, looking up at him. "The world will not forgive us easily. Then we will not ask for forgiveness. We will simply live, Eleanor. We will raise our children, build our life, and let the world think what it will." I kissed him then, a long, slow kiss that spoke of all the years we had lost and all the years we had yet to live. When we finally pulled apart, I saw the future stretching before us, uncertain and imperfect, but ours. The months that followed were not without challenges. There were still those who refused to acknowledge us, still doors that remained closed, still whispers that followed us wherever we went. But there were also unexpected kindnesses. Neighbors who invited us to dinner, tradesmen who treated us with respect, and slowly, tentatively, a new circle began to form around us, made up of people who valued substance over appearance. Thomas thrived under his father's attention. Charles taught him to ride, to read Latin, to appreciate the land that would one day be part of his heritage, even if it could never be his inheritance. And Thomas, for his part, adored his father with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who had never known rejection. Arabella blossomed as well. She took her role as older sister seriously, reading to Thomas, teaching him his letters, and defending him fiercely against any slight, real or imagined. She had become a bridge between two worlds, and she wore that responsibility with a grace that humbled me. As for Charles and me, we learned to navigate the complexities of our new life together. There were moments of friction, times when the weight of the past threatened to pull us apart, but we held fast to each other, determined to build something that would last. One evening, nearly a year after our wedding, I found Charles in the library, a letter in his hand and a strange expression on his face. I crossed to him, concerned. "What is it?" He handed me the letter, and I saw that it was from Lady Vivian. I read it slowly, my heart pounding, expecting venom and recrimination. But instead, I found something unexpected. She had written to apologize. Not for her beliefs, which she maintained were correct, but for the manner in which she had expressed them. She acknowledged that Arabella seemed happy, that Thomas was a bright and engaging child, and that Charles had, against all odds, managed to create a household that functioned. She did not ask for reconciliation, but she extended an olive branch, a tentative acknowledgement that perhaps she had been wrong to push so hard. I looked up at Charles, searching his face for his reaction. "What will you do?" He took the letter from me and folded it carefully. "I will write back. I will thank her for her words and invite her to visit if she wishes. But I will also make it clear that this is our family now, and nothing will change that." I nodded, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. It was not a perfect ending, not a complete absolution, but it was something, a small step toward healing, toward acceptance, toward the possibility that even the most broken relationships could be mended. That night, as I lay in bed beside Charles, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling around us, I thought about the journey that had brought us here, the pain, the fear, the moments when I had believed we would never find our way back to each other. And I thought about the future, the life we were building together, imperfect and unconventional, but filled with a love that had survived every test. Thomas would grow up knowing his father, knowing that he was wanted and loved. Arabella would grow into a woman of strength and compassion, shaped by the choices her father had made. And Charles and I would grow old together, our love deepening with each passing year, a testament to the power of choosing each other, again and again, no matter the cost. The world outside might never fully understand or accept us. But within the walls of Ashford Manor, we had created something precious. A family, a home, a love that transcended the boundaries of class and expectation. And that, I realized, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. I reached for Charles's hand in the darkness, and he squeezed my fingers gently. I closed my eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me, and I let myself believe in the future we had fought so hard to claim. We had faced the judgment of society, the betrayal of family, the weight of impossible choices. We had been tested and broken and rebuilt. But we had survived, we had loved, and we had won. Not in the way the world measured victory, perhaps, but in the way that mattered most. In the quiet moments of connection, the laughter of children, the warmth of a hand held in the darkness. In the knowledge that we had chosen each other, and that choice had been worth every sacrifice. As sleep began to claim me, I felt a peace settle over my heart, deep and enduring. The storm had passed, the battles had been fought, and now, at last, we could rest. Together. Always together. The morning sun would rise on a new day, and we would face it as we faced everything now. As a family, united by love and strengthened by the trials we had endured. And in that unity, we had found something rare and precious, something that could not be taken away by scandal or judgment or the passing of time. We had found home.